Colette's Corner.
Hi everybody, it's Colette from Colette Sewing Machines Plus in Yorkton. Today what we're going to do is binding. I did a video like this about 3-4 years ago, and everyone that comes into the store has asked me to redo that video. So the question I get asked all the time is, how do you do your binding? Well, I have 2 or 3 specific things that I use when I'm doing my binding to make my binding much easier for myself. The first tool that I use is called the Creative Grids Quick Trim and Circle Ruler. Okay, so this particular ruler, like all the rulers from Creative Grids, has a nice grip on the back so that your ruler is not moving around on you all the time. It grips really good while you're cutting. And this particular ruler has 45-degree angles going in both directions. So it doesn't matter if I use my ruler this way or if I use my ruler that way, I'm getting my proper angle. As well, this ruler has even numbers and your halves on this side. So if I'm going to be cutting something that is 2 inches, I'm going to use this side of it and I'm going to cut it at 2 inches. If I want to cut something at 2.5 or 4.5, I use my half side. So I'm either using this side of my ruler or I'm using that side, and they're really out there for you. The whole numbers are with white around them and the halves are with the black circle around them, so you can't go wrong. Okay, so this is called the Quick Trim Ruler, and this is what I'm going to use for cutting my angle when I'm joining my 2 pieces. After I've bound my entire quilt, then I'm going to use this tool, and it's called the Cut Right Bind Up tool. And when I'm using this tool, I'm going to explain it to you. You'll see it's got an L there and it's got an R there. So this means left, this means right. So when I go and join my bindings, I'm going to use that particular ruler and show you how that's done. Another thing that I use all the time is Roxanne glue basted. It doesn't matter what I'm doing, if I'm putting a pocket on, if I'm putting a binding on. Anything that I need to temporarily hold something into position for me, I use my Roxanne glue basted. And again, I'm going to show you how I use this when I do my final attaching of my binding. So what we're going to do first is we're going to cut our binding. So we're going to use this ruler. So we're just going to bring the camera down so that you can see, and we'll get started. Okay, so what I did is I first cut my strips of binding, and the width of binding that I like to use is 2.5 inches. So, and it's just the width of your fabric. So I just lay it down, cut from my fold, and I cut all the strips that I need. For this particular piece that we're using here, it's just a small demo piece. So all I needed was 2 strips. So what I'm going to do first is I am going to pile my strips. If I have 6 or 7 strips, I usually pile at least 4 or 5 on top of each other and cut them all at the same time. But what you need to remember to do when you're doing this is you need to pile them so that your right side is, your wrong side sitting on top of your right sides. You do not want right sides together or your angles will not work. So you need to pile them so that you have your pretty side up the whole entire time when you're doing it. So then I'm going to take this ruler, I'm going to put it here so that you can see. There's this little indentation right here, and that's what we want to line up with our ruler so that we get a 1/4 inch seam allowance there when we're joining our pieces. So what I want to do first is I want to get the salvage off. So I'm just going to line up my line at the bottom, straighten out my salvage, and because this little notch that I'm talking about here is on this side of the ruler and on that side of the ruler, it does not matter which way the ruler is when I cut my salvage off. And all I want to do is I'm just going to rotate my ruler like this so that I'm going to put this paper underneath so that you can really see, so that this white line that you see here, can you see that in there? So that when this white line is here, you want it to be exactly on the top of your fabric, and you want that little indentation to be sitting right in the corner. So I'm going to actually just lay that paper underneath for a second so that you can see the line when I'm doing it, and then I'll pull that paper out. So here I cut my salvage off, and all I want to do is I'm going to just rotate my ruler like this and slide it down until you see that that intersection is sitting in the corner. Okay, so I'm just going to get rid of my paper here so that I don't cut it, and make sure that my edge is lined up nicely, because now I've moved it 6 times. And I'm going to line my ruler up right along the edge here, make sure everything's nice and straight, and then I'm just going to cut this off. And now what we've done is we have created a seam allowance so that when I line this up, everything is lined up perfectly. I don't have to worry about a point that I need to judge. Do I need to go this way? Do I need to go that way? Because you know, on the end here, we always have that little point sticking out. So this here has been cut off flush for you so that when you join the two, they join absolutely perfectly. So all I'm going to do is sew from this corner to that corner, and you have a perfect join for your binding. So all I do next is, let's just say we've got 6 or 7 of them here piled up. I just pick it up and I just shake them, bring it down, just make sure that all of my layers are lined up really good. I don't worry about what's happening at this end because this end is already done. I only worry about a space about this big and make sure everything is lined up really nicely. So we're going to do that again. I'm going to get rid of my selvage, and again I'm only just going to rotate my ruler and put it to the corner, get our angle in there, and then cut it off. Okay, I'm only have 2 pieces here, but if you had several pieces, 6 or 7 pieces you needed to sew together, you are just going to continue to put them together end to end to end. Okay, but I'm just needing the 2, so I'm just going to sew my 2 pieces together. Because I only needed 2, I technically didn't need to cut both ends because I'm going to join it later with this ruler. So, but I just wanted to show you, one, if you had a whole pile of them, how you're going to turn it, and you're going to pile them again neatly on top of each other, turn your ruler and cut your edge off, and then head over to the sewing machine. So that's where I'm going right now, and I'll join you at the sewing machine. Okay, so I'm not much of a pinner, but when I'm doing binding, I always like to pin, and I prefer clips over pins, so I just use my clips. The goal is to make sure that the edge of this and the edge at the top here are lined up. And what you're going to do is you're going to actually start sewing in that corner right there, which it's kind of hard to see when it's on the back side of your fabric. But when you take it up to the machine, if you just peek back like this, you'll know exactly where to start. And then you're going to sew down and you're going to come off on this corner right here. And that's going to make sure that right along the top of your binding, that everything is nice and flush. So I'm just going to take it into my machine here. And I'm just going to peek underneath there and bring my foot down, and I should be at the space that I need to be. If I don't, I just go back and I just correct it. Okay, so I'm just going to make sure my machine's on the right stitch length, and I'm just going to stitch along here and get rid of my clip there. And right now I'm coming out just right at this point right here that we had talked about. So I'm just going to come out of that point right there. And then when we open this up, you see how this is all flush straight across on the top and on the bottom. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to head back over to the pressing station, and we're going to press this open, and I'm going to show you how to prepare your binding. Okay, so now we're back at the pressing station, and I always press these open. I don't press them to the side because I want the least amount of bulk possible in my seam. So I'm just going to gently press down on this, give it a tiny shot of steam, and then we have a nice, and you can just see how perfectly even both of those are on either side, and I didn't have to do any finicky checking to see where my point was and whether it was sticking out properly. So often they dip down and they just don't go on as nice if they're not completely straight. So now the next step that you need to do is you need to press your binding on half all the way down. So what I like to do is I will place my fingers like this, and then I just set my iron on. I'm lifting and I'm setting. I'm not going in and doing this, okay? What you have to remember, even though because this was, pardon me, cut on the cross of your fabric, you can see there's movement in here. So if I were to just go and start pressing, I can press like this, and then I end up with a curve in it, and that. I want to keep this thing as straight as possible so that when it goes onto my quilt, it goes on beautifully. So again, I just make sure that my edge is nice and even. And then I make sure as well that when I'm doing this, that my binding stays straight and that I don't start pressing and then I start curving off like this, and then you get a real disaster. Another thing that I make sure is that my seams are meeting at the top. Pardon me, my edges are meeting at the top. I don't want to see any of the edge at all from the back side. So I want these to be lined up nice and evenly. And then again, I'm just going to put my iron down. I'm not going to do any kind of motion of sliding it back and forth, and keep it nice and straight. Preparing of everything, whether it's cutting, pressing, anything like that, every inch of your quilt, if you pay attention to everything, your quilt is going to come out beautifully. So I know a lot of people think that the binding just, you can just go in there and just go for it. But again, you want everything to line up and be nice, nice and smooth. So I'm just going to continue on here and get to the end of my binding, and then I'm going to meet you back at the sewing machine, and we're going to get this on my little sample here. Okay, here we are at the sewing machine now. And what we're going to do here is, when we're putting our binding on, we need to leave ourselves a tail at the beginning and a tail at the end so that we're able to join them. And what I always do is I leave at least an 8 to 10 inch opening to be able to join. If you just leave a small opening, remember this is 2.5 inches wide. So if I were to try to join 2.5 inch pieces and I'm trying to join it in a space like this, this isn't even 2.5 inches. So there's no way that you can join them. So I like to leave myself at least 8 to 10 inches. On this particular piece, I'm going to leave a space about this big because of course I don't have a lot of room, okay? So I'm just going to bring it up here, and I'm just going to leave myself this tail so that I have something to work with. And I'm going to line my binding up along the edge of my quilt. And what my goal is here is I want to stitch a line so that when I bring my binding to the back, it meets the stitching line that I started with, okay? So I usually, on this particular machine, I know exactly where I need to set this to get those two to line up. But I'm going to show you how you can figure out where you need to place it on your particular machine that you have at home. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to just stitch myself a little line, okay? And then right here, I'm going to take this and I'm going to flip it over, and then I'm going to see if this fold meets that line that I stitched. And because you don't want any space in here. If I were to make this line up with the line that I did there, it's kind of hard to see on camera, but right here is hollow. There's no batting in there, there's no quilt of any kind, because I'm lining it up like I told you with that stitching line that I made there. So what I need to do is bring it right over, and you can see that my stitching line is back that far. So I know that I need to go back and move my stitching line over because I want this to match exactly to that stitching line. The reason that I do that is when I go back in to finish my quilt, I do it all by machine. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to top stitch this down. If you want to hand stitch it, that's fine, but for me, I don't like hand stitching, so I always do everything by machine. So if it's relaxing for you, you can go ahead and hand stitch it, but regardless, you still need this fold to just meet up with that line so that everything is nice and equal on both sides. So I'm going to go back in, and I don't have to take the stitching out because I'm going to this side of my stitching. If I had needed to go to that side of my stitching, then of course I'd need to take it out. So I'm going to come out this way, so I do not need to take that out. So what I'm going to do is just move it over a little bit, and then I'm going to do my little test run again, and I'm going to flip it over. Okay. And you can see now that it's meeting the stitching line that I have sewn, because there's my second stitching line, and you see now that is meeting perfectly on that stitching line. This is full. There's no hollowness in this at all, so it gives you an absolutely perfect binding. So we're going to go around the entire quilt using that particular line. Okay, so I'm going to back tack now because I know where I am is where I need to start and stop, so I'm going to back tack, and then I am going to follow that line that I know works. And our next thing that we need to do is we need to stop. I'm just going to put my needle down so that you can see this. I'm going to turn this way. Can you see that good there? Okay, so what I need to do now is I need to stop my stitching exactly the same distance as I sewed it coming this way. So I'm going to go and I'm going to stop basically right there, okay? Because again, I've done this so many times, I visually know exactly where I need to stop. So I like to use my stylist, and I will actually flip back like this so that I can more or less see where I need to stop in my stylist, and I just set my stylist in that position so that I then can stop on my stylist, well, not on my stylist, but at that spot. So there we are. I'm going to back tack, and I'm going to lift this out, and you can see here now that this distance here is the same as that distance there. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn it this way so that you can see, and hopefully I can do this backwards. Yeah, there we go. Okay, and I am going to bring this up just like that. Okay, so what I've done is folded this up to my corner like that. I'm going to put my stylist here so because I'm working backwards for myself. And then I'm going to make sure that all of this is lined up beautifully in this corner. I don't want this sitting this way. I don't want this fold coming up so that you can see the fabric like that. I need it to be flush going, oops, I need it to be flush going this way and flush along that way. So I'm going to turn it back around so that I can see what I'm doing on this side. And I'm going to fold this up. And what you need to also make sure is that this fold on this side sits on top of that piece. Again, the best way to do this is make sure that when you look at the side here, that these are all folded evenly. And if they're folded evenly there and you have a nice square corner, they're going to be folded evenly on this side here. So I'm just going to check this. It's really good. You were good here, we're good there, and we're good there. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to my machine and I am going to do that exact same seam allowance that we talked about, and I'm going to start right at the top. Don't start down the distance of this seam that you did. We want to start right at the top, and then we're going to again go around the corner. Again, I like to use my stylist here because what can happen is because we've got two pieces here, this top one sometimes can push forward and cause a little bit of a bubble, and because I don't pin, I just use my stylist to keep that bubble from not pushing forward. Okay, so I'm just going to go around this entire piece, and then I'm going to stop right over here so that I have this nice, decent opening here, and then I'm going to meet you back over at the pressing station. Okay, so now I've gone all around my placemat here, And now I need to join my two ends. And you can see that I left myself a really nice opening to be able to do that. And it's really important to have at least 8 to 10 inches on this end here that you start with too. This other end, you usually end up with a little bit more, which is fine, because having more is better than not having enough. Okay, so I'm now going to join these two pieces. So what I'm going to use is I'm going to use this cut Rite ruler here. Okay, so what I'm going to start with is I'm going to first do my left hand side. So when I cut my left hand side, I need to see the letter L placed the way that you see it in the alphabet. I do not want to see my L going this way or I'm going the wrong way. Okay, so we want to be able to see this placed like this. Now when I go to do the right hand cut on my binding, I need to rotate my ruler like this so that my R is facing up the way you see it in the alphabet. So we're going to start with the left hand side and then I'm going to show you how to do it on the right hand side. So first of all, we're going to take our two pieces and we're going to lay them down so that they meet each other just like that. Okay, and what I like to do, a lot of people will butt it up exactly like that. Remember earlier when I showed you there's movement in this fabric because it's cut on the cross? I always leave a joining space. Okay, and that's room for it to grow because it is going to grow. It just grows. No matter what, it's going to grow. If this were a bias, I would even move this out a little bit further because your bias grows even more so, of course, than what your cross does. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab that pen over there. I'm not good with pens, ladies. I always forget them. And of course, you're not going to use a pen, but I want you to be able to see this when I'm drawing on it. So I'm going to scratch that with my fingernail and make sure everything's sitting nice and flush along the edge and this is sitting nice and flat. I don't want to see any give in it because then they're not going to join correctly. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide my hand so that it sits nice and firm. I didn't pull it or stretch it. I just made sure that everything was nice and smooth. And then on this side, I'm going to do the same thing and I'm going to make a fold mark. Then I'm going to open this up and open it like this. And in here, where this fold and this fold meet, I'm going to make a crosshatch. Okay, can you see that crosshatch? It's kind of hard because of the way, the color of the fabric. So, and then I'm going to go onto this side. I'm going to open it up as well. And then again, I am going to make a crosshatch at that particular where the two pieces folded into each other. I'm going to put that one off to the side because we're not doing the right hand side right now, we're doing the left hand, so we need to make sure that our ruler is sitting like this. Then I'm going to open this piece up, make sure you can see here as well why we need an opening like this, because we need space to work with our piece. So now on here, remember on our other ruler, we had that little crosshatch? Well, we've got that little crosshatch on this one as well. So I want this crosshatch this time to line up with the crosshatch that I drew on my piece of fabric. So I'm going to take this here and I'm going to line it up exactly, get my hands here, on this crosshatch. Okay, so this line on the ruler is sitting on my fold line. This line is sitting on the other fold line, and then that's sitting right in that crosshatch that I drew. Then I'm going to go and I'm going to cut this off, okay? And then we're going to have this point at the end here. And this is that point I talked about that we don't want because it's not easy to line it up. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to slide it up and I'm going to make sure that this meets here and that meets there. And I'm going to cut that off. And you see, we've got that same look that we did on the other, so it's easy to match up. So now this is the part that's a little bit tricky, okay? So now we've done our left-hand side. All we're going to do is rotate We're not going to flip. We're going to rotate so that we see our R coming up the way it needs to be. Then we're going to open our fabric. This is where the crosshatch was. So I'm going to take this, and again, I want it to line up with my fold here, my fold there, and that sits on the crosshatch. But how am I going to cut this? I don't want to cut it on top of my piece of fabric. So all I do is make sure that everything's laying the way I want it to lie. And then I'm just going to turn it like this onto my cutting board so that then I can nicely line it up the way it needs to be, and then I can cut it off. So you can see why it's so important to have a longer tail, because there's no way I could get in there if I only had left myself a tiny little piece, a tiny bit of room. So again, I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to just, wants to pop away on me here, and then I'm going to again slide this up so that those corners match and get rid of that. And now you can see that these two pieces are going to join perfectly on top of each other. So what I'm going to do now is head over to the sewing machine, and I'm just going to sew these two together, and then I'm going to come back to the pressing table because everybody knows how to sew two joins together, and then I'm going to show you how to finish it off. Okay, so now I've joined the two pieces, and I'm going to press it open just like I did with the others when I was joining them. And again, it looks like I'm pressing down, but I'm not, because this is definitely on the bias, so you got to be really careful. And then I'm going to just nicely set this down. Again, give it a good press, and you can see how that all lined up perfectly. There's not too much fabric or too little fabric. It sits just nicely, and that's where leaving that little bit of a space open works really well. So now I'm going to actually use my glue basted, because I find when I'm sewing this, especially this top one, you see how if it was being pushed with the sewing machine, how it's pushing everything over. So I go in and I just put a little dot of the glue basted along the actual seam, and then I'm just going to hold my iron on it, because the iron is what dries it and holds it into position. And then what I like to do is I like to take this one here too. Whoops, the glue is coming out too fast. And I'm just going to put a little dot here so that this top one doesn't continue to grow when I'm stitching this down. And then I've saved myself from having to use any pins or anything like that. So now this is all secure and ready for me to sew. So I'm going to go to the machine, and now I'm going to join those two, and I'm going to come back and show you how I flip it around to the back side. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to press this back like this so that we then in turn can bring it around to the back side to meet the stitching line that we had done earlier. So I'm just going to take this and I'm just going to gently push out to the back side, out to the edge, and just do that all the way around. And you still don't want to iron. You just want to, and every time that I'm moving the iron, I'm actually lifting it just a centimeter, just so that it's off the piece and I'm not dragging the iron. Because this quilt, when you do it as well, the straight of your grain stays nice and firm, but if you've pieced your border, your cross grain still has some movement, so you still want to be, careful with what you're doing and don't get in there and over press anything. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my corner here, and I'm going to go and flip all of these corners over. There we go. And then I'm going to bring it around to the back side. And I want to see that meet. You see how that is meeting? I don't know, actually I'm going to actually draw with a pen here so that you can actually see that stitching line that I did. And then I'm going to bring this, and you see how it meets just at that stitching line. So then I'm just going to take it and take my iron, and then I'm just going to make sure that they're all meeting at that line. And what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of giving my piece a bit of a memory so that when I go to use my glue basted, that it's just easier. Okay, and then I'm just going to go here, and then again just give it a bit of a memory. And then I'm going to take my rock sand glue basted, and I'm just going to put little dabs. And this is a short piece here, so I can go all the way along. But if I'm doing a quilt, I'll do it in portions. So then I'm going to hold my iron on top of there, and I'm just kind of helping it along here so that it sits really nice along my stitching line that we had done earlier. Okay, and you can see how that holds it. Whoops, I'm sorry. Holds it into position for you so that when I go to stitch this from this side here, I don't have to worry what's going on this side because it's already in position for me. When I come to my corner here, I just go in and I play with this until I get my corner the way I want it to look. I'm going to go back a little bit there. There, you can see how that then meets very nicely in the corner there. So I have to give it a memory again so that when I go to put my glue basted down that it looks really nice in the corner as well. So I'm just going to put a little dot here and on this corner just so that it sits nicely, and position that again and place my iron on there. And then we're actually going to go to the machine and we're going to stitch here and stitch around the corner just so that you can see how the stitching line works when it's done. So I'm going to meet you at the sewing machine. Okay, so now what my goal is I'm going to stitch right along here, and you can choose how deep you want to do it. I usually do mine right about here. So when I do that, you see it's going to come out, whoops, on the back side exactly in the same place. And if it's not exact every time, then don't panic about it, because if someone wants to flip your quilt over and say, oh, this didn't match, then I don't think we need to worry about that too much. Okay, so I'm just going to, for me, I use just the inside edge of this particular foot that I have. You'll find that magic spot for yourself, and you will, just follow that magic spot all the way along. So I'm just going to stitch along here, and then when I come up to my corner, I'm going to come in. Okay, and this is where my needle up and down comes in really handy. That little angle that we made there, the needle's just going to fall on the other side of that angle. And once I get it out of the machine, I will show you that as well. And then when you turn your corner, it turns really nicely and gives you a really nice look in your corner there. Okay, because I just fell off the other side. I actually use my stylus to show you. I stitched and I just fell off the side right there. Then I turned and I continued down. Okay, so here's our front side and there's our back side. So it really looks good on absolutely both sides, and there's your corner going around your corner. Okay, if you wanted your thread to totally disappear, of course, you would use exactly the same color that your fabric is. I wanted you to be able to see this, and actually I do most of my bindings, I just use the Aurifil off-white piece. It just seems to blend in with everything that you're doing, and it's kind of nice to see that little bit of stitching around it. But if you totally don't like to see the stitching, then just make sure your thread matches. Okay, so that is Colette's Corner for today. I hope you learned a lot from this. Make sure that you subscribe, share, and like my page, and I will see you next time with another really fun ruler to show you how to do the odd corners, well, the 120s and the 60s and that kind of thing. So that will be my next video, so stay tuned. See you then.